This episode of the Sixth Sense Report contains some language, graphic descriptions, and may not be suitable for young children. Listener discretion is advised.
If you don't read the newspaper, you're uninformed. If you do read it, you're misinformed. What is the long-term effect of too much information?
Information, I just need some information. I've been dying. Is it lack of education? I've been reading without any transformation. I'm addicted. Is it overstimulation? Hey.
Welcome to the Sixth Sense Report.
Hear ye, come one, come all. You are listening to the Sixth Sense Report with Joel Nikoloff and Darnell Samuels.
Man, every time we have a guest, all I want to do is say I'm blessed, but you're going to give me a hard time.
Yeah, no. This time I think it's warranted. I think it's warranted to say that this is a special guest.
Yeah, well, I mean, it's special in, we've been on Kazingram Dialogue separately together, and obviously, well, if you count featuring that episode on our podcast, technically IJ's been on the show before, but
not formally,
and technically that was on we were on his show that we just replayed. So
and he's a special guy. That's why I say this is a special guest. He's a special guy. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome IJ Makan Moves. That's what we'll call him. IJ Makan Moves. Welcome to the show, man.
Man, thanks for having me. It's great to be on the show officially now. And talking to you both, because you both, as you said, both of you have been on Kazingram Dialogue with Amos and I, and we've enjoyed your friendship as all four of us do this on this journey of podcasting and media.
Because Amos is on the team.
Yeah, Amos and I, and then you got Joel, and it's like the you guys are like white and black, and we're the brown and white.
Oh yeah, that's right. That's
good.
That's right. Okay, so were you gonna say something, Joel?
I was gonna say, I wonder if Amos appreciates sort of the, I don't want to call it a free pass because that's not not the right word, but the fact that it's not two white guys having a conversation allows Darnell and I to have conversations.
Yeah, but I'm sure as people saying there's probably too much white guys.
Hey, it's not our problem that we make up such a large population or percentage of the population.
Well, according to critical race theory, well, no, that's not one of those episodes. That's not that episode yet. But yeah. Shout out to I don't know, famous Amos, almost famous Amos. Almost famous. Good dude. Yeah, so IJ, for the listeners who don't know, let's give them a background on yourself.
So I was born in India. I moved here, just under 10 years ago. And
sorry to interrupt you. I just saw you tweet about the Olympic person who won a medal from your town.
Oh, yeah. She's from my hometown, Mirabu Chanu. And she is the first Indian woman I think it's actually the first Indian to win Olympic medal in 21 years in weightlifting. Wow. And it's huge, right? And she was the first one to medal for India. And it's crazy because, where I'm from, Manipur is the state that I'm from. And it's, where it's not like any of the other states, all the other, you have like Mumbai. Mumbai's not a state, but Maharashtra is a state. All these other major states, they have all these all the money coming in, whereas Manipur, and specifically Imphal, the city or town, I should say, small. It's rural. It's underdeveloped. So there are quite a few well-known athletes coming out from that area, and so sort of seeing this and on such a big stage. And for people to be like, wait a second, this woman's Indian? She doesn't even look Indian. That's the most common thing you get, right?
Yeah, well, actually, I wanted to hit that point to make, because we're not on video yet. But for those of you guys who can't see IJ does not look Indian. Exactly. I know that sounds racist to say, but when I first met him, I thought he was Chinese or something.
Yeah, I've got Chinese. There was a Hawaiian guy here in Ottawa. We're talking, and he's like, "Oh man, you must be from Hawaii too, then." And I was like, "No, I'm not." She's like, okay, you're probably just full Japanese or something. I was like, I'm
Yep.
not Japanese.
Yep.
And I was like, okay, then I give up. I was like, yeah, I'm from India. And it's like, what? But yeah, the
Right.
northeastern part where I'm from, the majority of people look like me, and we range from people who look more Chinese, people who look more Japanese, people who look more Korean.
Fascinating.
Yeah, it's a whole mixed bag of people. In that
Do you know the
area.
history of your people, like, and how that happened?
Well, so India became an independent, got its independence, and I might get this date wrong. So if there's an historian list, I think it's 1947 or 1949. It's one of those two. When they got the independence, the area that I'm from, so I belong to a tribe called the Naga tribe, and the Naga tribe, they're headhunters, and they became a Christian tribe in 1899 when a missionary from Britain, his name is William Pettigrew, he came over, and that's a whole crazy story of like how that happened. But he came over, converted my immediate tribe, which is the Tangkhul Naga tribe, and from then onwards, after 20-30 years of him, sort of his influence, eventually the whole tribe converted. And now, I believe like 90% are all Christians. But how we became part of India was essentially when India got its independence, the tribe, the Naga tribe, they had also declared their own independence. And the British had given them, signed a document saying, oh yeah, you guys have your own independence. But then India got its independence a day after. And obviously India is more powerful at that point, more unified, not unified, but more organized. And so they sort of came in and took over that part. I think it's strategic on their end, right? Because we're neighboring China, Tibet. So there has been the longest civil unrest. I don't know if it's in history, but it's definitely the longest civil unrest in India. And that's been going on since 1951, I believe. And so growing up there, it was just, it's a sort of, the sort of protest that happened, over the past year in the States and some here, with the tear gas and rubber bullets. That's essentially my childhood.
Wow.
Right? That's just growing up. You sort of saw that every month, maybe every 2 months.
Now, when you say saw, do you mean like on TV in the news, or like on the street walking home
on the
from
street,
school?
like just on the street walking home from school? There was one time where we came home and our house was unbuilt, like unfinished. So we came home from school, and as I'm going up the stairs, if you can imagine in your head, like a room that's unfinished, so there are no windows, no roof, right? It's just like a cement building. We come home and there are army guys inside of a house with their weapons perched on these on these windowsills, because there might be a protest, or I suppose there was a protest going to happen. So they're all sort of up there, and as a kid, you're growing up, you think, wow, what is happening right now? All these army guys in my house, and they're just, they don't really care about you. They're just in there. If you said no to them to entering the house, they would have entered the house anyway.
Yeah.
There was that, and because we lived somewhat on the main street, like our house was just off the main street, we saw essentially every protest that had, we saw there was one protest that took place, where we witnessed there were tear gases and rubber bullets, and that was the first time that I witnessed people being shot. And the army opened fire on these protesters right outside our house. So you just hear da, 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 and then bang bang, and these are these tear gas guns being shot, right? And they look like cannons being shot, and you just see a trail of tear gas going up. And some ended up in our house, and we had Korean people. We had Korean Americans visiting. It was first time in India, first experience is getting tear gassed by the Indian army. And we, and then we saw the aftermath of the protest, and there's blood on the streets, and people were being carried off and putting into autos, or they call them, I think people here are more, they call them here tuk-tuks, or what Thai people call tuk-tuks. In India, they put them in tuk-tuks or autos, and they put them on rickshaws, and people were like, they were shot up, some died, of course. And these army guys, man, they have no mercy. Because essentially what they have is, in India, there's an army act where the army have greater power than the police in Manipur, the state that I'm from, right? So there are stories, and, some I know have actually happened, where they come into contact with, say, a young adult, right? And they get stopped on the streets to do a drug. They search for drugs or whatever. And if, let's say, the young man sort of resists or does something, or maybe doesn't even resist, right? But he's suspected of being part of the underground militia, he'll just get shot with no questions asked. He'll just get shot, and obviously you just can't shoot people. So then they would place a weapon beside him and say, "Oh, he shot us first." And that's it. So we were always growing up. It was always like, okay, you don't act suspicious. You mind your own business. Don't go around trying to cause trouble with the police or with the army. Do what they say. Stay out of trouble. That was essentially it. And then come here to Canada, and it's essentially peace.
Now, in regards to you coming to Canada from India, and how old were you when you came?
I was 21.
21?
Yeah. Okay,
well, yeah, so what's the difference?
Between India and Canada?
Yeah.
Man, huge. I mean, like lots of sociological differences, lots of political differences, of course. But one of the biggest difference for me was not hearing cars honking. I remember landing here and, got out to the airport, and I was like, okay, of course, we're at the airport. You probably won't hear too many people honking. I got on total silence, a complete silence. I got into the car, and we're driving. This is in Toronto. I landed in Toronto. So I at this point, I knew what Toronto was. I'd done my research. Biggest city in Canada. We're driving on the highway, and I'm not even kidding. I'm waiting for somebody to honk, right? Because there are all these cars.
What do you mean?
About honking?
Yeah.
So in India, essentially, anytime you're on the car, anytime you're driving and you want to make any sort of move on the street. So if you want to turn left, right, you have to you essentially honk before you turn left.
So there's no such thing as turn signals.
Nobody uses turn signals. You stick out your hands, you honk. If you want to go, let's say I'm going around a corner. Okay, here you would slow down. You go around a corner, right? You kind of look left, right, make sure there's no pedestrian. In India, no chance. You just bust right. You just take a bus. You just turn right, honk, to let people know that you're on your way here.
I'm coming.
Yeah.
Beep, 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 beep.
The street signs. What do you call those things? The painted lines. They're just suggestions. They're just suggestions. There. Nobody takes it seriously.
Do you have traffic lights?
Yeah, but it exists.
Thing.
It exists.
Suggestion.
Yeah, man, there are so many. I'll tell you a funny story. So, I'm driving in India. So I used to drive manual in India.
Nice.
And essentially, there's a street where you kind of come out of the corner of a street, and it's this huge main street, right? And if you wanted to get across to the other side, you would literally drive your car straight through the middle of the road. You just keep driving, right? I don't know how to describe this to you, but imagine there's a cross, like a crossroad, right? Two streets going. One is going one direction, and one, let's say the straight one's going straight, and the one that's cutting across is only cutting across to the cross. You essentially, to get through, there's no traffic light. You just have to keep driving your car. So whoever has more balls to stick their car
like chicken
in front, that's how cars stop. And it's so crazy to me. But that's one of the main differences.
So is there a lot of accidents, or is there like
tons.
a lot of bumper, like fender, like bumping into people?
Benders, for sure.
And then they just drive away.
Drive away, no helmets. My dad was driving back. My dad's a minister in India, and he used to travel from our house to the church, every day. And one of the days that he was traveling, this is a true story. One of the days he was traveling, there was a motorcycle that was driving up behind him. So if you imagine the curb on the road, and there's that lane divider, a cement lane divider. We have it here as well in parts of Canada. This motorcyclist drove up on the sleeve of the divider. Right, so there's very little space between vehicle and the divider, and in front of it is a lorry truck, or like a big truck, a huge truck carrying cement or sand or rocks. I think it was rocks. And he's not wearing a helmet. Okay, so he drives up, and something happens to his wheel, or he gets a bit nervous, and his bike tips, and he falls between the wheels.
Whoa!
And the lorry obviously can't see him. My dad's driving behind this lorry, and this might be too gory for some people, so just take a pause for
Put on mute.
Yeah. So the lorry goes over the guy's head, and his head explodes.
Oh.
And this is and my dad's on his way to the church, right?
Ugh.
So he just witnesses this guy's head explode, and he came home and told us, he's like, "Yeah, today was not a good day."
Ugh.
It's just, but yeah, people are. There's so many different.
People complain about driving in Brampton.
Man, there are a lot of Indians there too. So I
know.
I believe it.
I know.
But no honking.
No honking? Really?
No, there's no honking like that in Brampton, though.
Oh my gosh!
At least not. Darnell, is there honking like that in Brampton?
Nah.
Nothing
But it's like that in Jamaica too.
Well, what's funny is I remember Russell Peters' joke about like a Vespa being a Vinnie van.
Oh yeah, for sure. I mean, like some of the things that Russell Peters says. I know he grew up here in Canada, in Brampton, I believe, right?
Yeah. He's from Brampton.
So many things that he says about India, even though he never lived there. I'm assuming he got it from his dad. Like his dad must have told him stories. So true. Like I grew up listening to Russell Peters in India, and I thought, man, this guy knows India so well. How? And I was like, oh, it must be his dad.
Yeah.
That's good. Yeah. So, you came here at 21. I guess the question is, why and who did you come with? Like, what was the catalyst for leaving? What happened when you first got here? Yeah. So
I mean, I came here to do my undergrad in philosophy, and I came by myself. There's no. I think a lot of people. Something I've noticed is maybe it's more Americans. They make a big deal of like leaving the house. Leaving the house to do your own thing, to go to college is a big deal. But I essentially got kicked. I wouldn't say I got kicked out of the house, but when we got sent to boarding school when I was 11, and we didn't get this. We only saw my parents 3 months out of the year. So 21, when I was leaving, I was like, man, I feel like an old dude leaving the house, So we came here, did my philosophy undergrad, went and did my my grad school in philosophy, and then decided that academia is too corrupt and not something that I wanted to pursue, and so then I joined the tech world, and that's where I've been. Cool. Yeah.
So then, so me and you, we met at Tyndale.
Yeah, that's right.
But we didn't have any classes together, did we?
I don't think we had any.
No, probably had mutual friends that introduced us.
No, I definitely. Yeah, no, we certainly didn't have. I think we had Danny Soto. Danny Soto introduced us.
Okay, yeah. Oh, that's right. Yeah. Shout out to Danny. And Danny probably introduced you as like, okay, you want someone to debate? This is the guy. That's probably one of those.
He's like, yeah, you should meet my friend Darnell. I was like, oh yeah, let's meet Darnell. And I think I don't know if we had at that Tyndale. There's this like little coffee place. I don't know if that's the first time we met there and we talked.
Yeah. It was a
good times,
conversation.
Man. Good times.
Yeah. Good times. Blessing. I was gonna say, in light of you studying philosophy, like with the show, how did the show come about? Kazingram.
Yeah. So Kazingram
is that your like getting into your? Oh, I did philosophy. Now I'm in tech. Now I need something to fulfill my philosophy urges. Is that what drove you to the podcast?
Essentially, it's that. Essentially, it was me wanting to have philosophical conversations and keep up with what was happening in philosophy and in academia without actually being in there. And I found that was the best way. And there were things while I was doing grad school which annoyed me to the brim. Right, there were a lot of things that included professors or people in academia in general, I should say, who refused to speak up for what they truly believed and would instead espouse the prevailing view, just so that they could get along or just so that they could get their next but their next raise, or they could get into grad
school.
Keep their tenure. Like, there were so many of these things happening that frustrated me. And there were conversations that I wanted to have or tried to have that didn't happen. So when I was in grad school, it was a very small philosophy group, but I was heading out the philosophy society there, and we put on we put on a few talks on free speech in academia.
This happened at Tyndale?
No, this was at St. Mary's where I did my grad school.
Okay.
And I thought this was around the time Jordan Peterson was just starting, right? Like, this is like early 2016. I should say mid 2016. And I thought, man, I'm sure people would love to have these conversations. Like, this is happening to our school. At St. Mary's, the philosophy chair before I joined, a few years before I joined, essentially, from my understanding, was fired, but on paper he was asked to leave. And do you remember the Charlie Hebdo incident, right, where they drew the Prophet Muhammad?
Yep.
And then they got assassinated, right?
Mm-hmm.
So around that time, the chair of philosophy at St. Mary's, in support of freedom of expression and free speech, especially in academia and especially for journalists, or I suppose, commentators, posted the cartoon on his door, right, in support of these guys who were assassinated. And St. Mary has a very big population of Muslim students. So these Muslim students saw it, or somebody saw it and then told the Muslim students, and some of the Muslim students came up to confirm it was there, and they made a huge stink about it. And the school, the students asked the professor to take it down. He refused. Then the bureaucrats asked him to take it down. He refused. President asked him, but then eventually, like, the board was like, okay, I'm obviously simplifying the whole story here.
Mm-hmm.
But essentially, they're like, okay, either you take it down or you're done. And to him, as a philosopher and as somebody with integrity, said, no, I support these guys and their freedom of expression. Goodbye. He was gone. So, St. Mary has that sort of taint. And I came in, I learned about it, and I wanted to have, just conversations about free speech. Literally, it was like I wouldn't say nobody showed up, but like 20, I think it was like 15 people showed up, right? And it was advertised. I would say it was advertised, and the majority of the people who showed up were not even from St. Mary's. They were
really?
There were people from outside of the university. They were local, Halifax people. And so one guy came up to me after, and he was an older guy, and he was like, "Man, I'm so glad you put this talk on, because I feel like I can't have any of these conversations, or these conversations aren't even happening." And so that essentially started spinning my wheels. And by the time I decided not that academia, I think it was too corrupt. And if you really wanted to have an impact, or to really do something to help people, it can be in academia, in my opinion. There's just academics, not all academics, a majority of academics, philosophers, I should be more specific, and some theologians even, but this goes across all the board. I think a lot of people don't have skin in the game when they're doing it, right? There are a lot of academics who espouse views that if they were asked to live them out, they wouldn't do it. They just simply wouldn't do it. An example of this is, there's a South African philosopher, his name slips my mind now, but he espouses that everybody should kill themselves because we are destroying the planet through climate change. So he espouses that we all go and kill ourselves, so you get euthanized, stop having kids. Now, if you truly have skin in the game, you should be the one who does it first, so that we can, see it. But obviously he doesn't. He's still living. He's still writing. And that was an extreme example, but there are lots of other examples of academics who don't have any skin in the game. They're just sort of saying things they don't mean, essentially, to get the raises, to keep their tenure, and that just frustrated me. And some of them I knew, my acquaintances. So I started it so that we could have honest conversations about things that mattered, right? In philosophy, or things that I was interested in, that I didn't think anybody was sort of having these conversations. And you guys are essentially doing the more political side of what I'm interested in.
Oh, political. Oh, I hope not. Politics. I hope not. Like, we jumped on IJ. Like, that's no. I'd have to correct you on that, IJ, and the listeners, man. We try to avoid the politics. That's why we talk a lot about economics and theology, the ideas a little bit that come before politics. But
I think,
but definitely we get into political issues. Yeah, but that's a good way to put it. Yeah, because you guys deal with philosophy.
Yeah, so when I say politics, I'm not necessarily talking politics as in Justin Trudeau and his gang of minions who are essentially who think that they're gods and can do whatever they want in Canada. I'm not essentially talking about, it's more broad, like political philosophy, sort of, in that range. So it's just, that's essentially how Kazingram Dialogue started. Like, that was the catalyst for me.
And who do you usually have on the show? Like,
mainly philosophers. Yeah, mainly philosophers, neuroscientists, theologians we've had, and people who are into culture, or understand culture better than me, I should say. So a good friend of mine, Axel Kazadi.
Yeah, shout out to Axel.
I don't know.
Because he went to Tyndale as well.
Yeah, he went to Tyndale, and now he's a professor out in Kingswood.
Yeah, I know.
And
look at this guy.
This guy's
Black man Axel Foley.
Yeah. So he's a professor. He understands culture. He listens to rap music. Not that adds anything to it, but it is somewhat provocative that there's this guy. He's a professor. He teaches at a Wesleyan university. The guy who listens to rap. He used to be a rapper. He's like this mysterious man. So and talking to him, talking to Axel, for example. Axel, I would say he would consider himself a biblical scholar / theologian. I think that's what he would consider himself. So Axel, and the conversations we have generally revolve around what it means to be a human person. How do we act in this? How do we act in the world? How should the world be, and what kind of world do we want to live in? How influential Christianity has been to the world, which is, in my opinion, quite undeniable as to how influential that has been. And some other topics that I think about often, or try to think deeply about, is one topic that I've gotten interested in is reading a research paper on psychedelics as more research comes out. And I had this guest, a neuroscientist, Michael. If Michael's listening to this, Michael's a professor at Harvard, and I was talking to Michael. He was one of the early guests, and he was sort of telling me about the psychedelic research, and I was like, "Wow, this is fascinating." It's helping these prisoners who are serial killers or straight up thugs, helping them calm down and then helping them live like changed men. Essentially, that's the best way to describe it. And so, we'll have people who know about, let's say, the research in psychedelics, or what the human mind is. How does the human mind work? Is it identical to a computer? Like that sort of topic are things that I often talk about, and obviously, the existential topic is something that I'm deeply interested in.
So, I heard the story that I'm about to ask the question for, but I think it's what's the name of your podcast about?
So, Kazingram Dialogue. Yeah.
I was going to say, I think you told the story on the episode with your wife.
Yeah.
But I'll put that in the show notes page, but yeah, for our listener, what is Kazingram, and why Kazingram Dialogue? What is that supposed to represent?
Kazingram is the son of our the name of our son, Kazingram, who we had a stillborn, my wife and I, a few years ago, and that was before we knew he was sick. Kazingram, our son, he essentially had a heart attack when he was 8 months, a bit older than 8 months, and he died in the womb. And so before we knew anything about that, and I was thinking about leaving academia, and we had named our son Kazingram. And Kazingram in my language, Tangko, means heaven or heavenly. And so when I was thinking of what to call the podcast, I wanted it to be something that represented conversations that sort of went beyond the day-to-day. And I was sort of playing, I thought, oh, this is a nice name, it's the name of our son. And then when I found out that, he had a serious heart disease, a very rare heart disease, I wanted to honor his name and name the podcast. And so Kazingram Dialogue, essentially, literally translated, would be heavenly dialogues. It would what the translation be. So, yeah, and on the podcast with my wife, I think we briefly mentioned that.
Yeah. So, I mean, you mentioned it in passing, but having a stillborn child, obviously is a very difficult thing to go through. I know when, in terms of my wife and I, when we went through, we have 2 children. So when we were going through the process, we were very willing early on to tell people, let's say, a lot of people wait till 13 weeks.
13 weeks, yeah.
It's sort of the cutoff period for us. Our attitude was, for those that are part of our life, if we go through something, obviously, we're not talking about stillbirth, but losing a baby early on, we wanted our friends and family to be there for us.
Yeah.
And so I wonder if you could speak to, maybe the early on in the process, did you have a similar approach? And then, what was that? Obviously very tragic and probably traumatic as well. What was that like, and how has that shaped, I guess, you as well as the podcast?
For sure. I think my wife and I are on the same page as you there. And we think it's very important, and I think people who hold the sanctity of life closely and dearly, I think, have done a disservice when it comes to pregnancy, especially now in the age in which we live, where a lot of babies will survive and make it till birth. where they've kept it to themselves and said, oh, actually, we only want to tell people at 13 weeks or, whatever, 3 months in, that's when we really know it. But in reality, human life, you don't really know when it's going to end, right? You don't even know when. If you're alive, you could die tomorrow. You could have a heart attack. You could die in a car crash. Your building could burn down. Anything could happen, right? And I think for us, it became even more precious that our son Kazingram had a name. So we named him quite early on. So we found out we were pregnant. I think, I want to say maybe a month and a half in or something. Maybe
5-6 weeks, give or take.
Yeah, give or take. We didn't know, and we found out my wife was pregnant, and at first I was a bit shocked. I was like, "What? I didn't know." Like, I was just,
how did that happen?
Yeah, I was totally I was totally taken back by it, and then obviously as you get the news, I was like, "Oh, this is super exciting," and we went through the early ultrasounds, and we wanted to celebrate it, and so we thought, well, what's the point of hiding it and pretending like, this child is only gonna. We only know if it's gonna survive after 3 months, right? Where for us, obviously, Kazingram died 8 months. So the idea behind it is just when you name, especially I think naming anything allows you to have a deeper connection with the baby. And so when we named Kazingram, it was as if we, it sounds sort of silly, but it was as if we knew him better now that we named him, and we would call him Kazingi, and you could feel him kicking, and he would respond, and you had all these connections that we were very thankful for that we had with him. So the way in which I think people are apprehensive to share the news, I think is sad, but I understand that a lot of people do have miscarriages. I think it's very common. I wouldn't say super common, but it is more common than people expect. And I think not talking about it hurts more than it does. Because when you have a miscarriage, even if it's a very young baby, right? Even if it's a small fetus,
mm-hmm.
There is something about human nature such that the woman feels it. You may not be able to put a quantitative thing behind it, but there is a sense in which you feel the loss, and you feel like there's something missing. And even for the father, right? You feel like, I don't know, you feel like you've lost something in the process. And I think having that grieving process of, if you had shared it with some of your close friends, then your close friends know that you've lost a baby, and they're there to support you and to be there for you. And I think it's important for people to be aware of that. And I think people should be more willing to share the good news of being pregnant much sooner than 3 months.
Okay. Okay.
I think it's important that way. And I think your second question was, how did it change, or how did it shape, right, Joel?
Yeah, how does it shape you / with the podcast? Like, I'm assuming, like us, there's an aspect of the reason you do the podcast is more than just simply, for ourselves. Like, when Darnell jumped all over you with the politics point, I was going to sort of that for me, it's that people use politics to influence how I have to live my life. And so I'm concerned about the ideas that underline those things.
Yeah.
And that's really, for my kids, my family, their future, right? Like, that's what drives me to have these conversations, is because the ideas are what it's like politics follows the culture.
Yeah.
Right.
100%. There's no doubt about that. You think about, we don't have to go into this too far, but if you think about the euthanasia bill that got passed a few years ago here, right?
Mm-hmm.
Back in 2001, when that father, I think he was in Winnipeg, I could be wrong where he was, where he essentially gas chambered his daughter in his car. Do you guys remember that?
Yeah.
I think it was in 2001 or 2002, I forget. And he got sentenced, And the Supreme Court said this is completely evil. This is wrong. Can't do this. This is the Supreme Court. The Supreme Court, had a change of heart in
15 years?
In 15 years?
Whatever.
What, they just decide, oh yeah, this is something that we were strongly against, philosophically, in principle, but then now that culture shifted, we too have to change with it. And that's essentially, you see that with so many things here. I mean, in the world as a general whole. And culture plays such a big role that I think people really either play dumb that culture plays a big role, or they are simply naive to it. And I would say they're playing dumb.
In regards to what? Sorry.
In regards to thinking that culture doesn't play a role in politics. And so I think it's important, for you guys to have these conversations, because it's crucial to understand why things are happening the way they're happening. If you get to the root of it, you could address it much better.
I actually would say I think there's a level of willful ignorance too, because it's the willful ignorance is their desire to shape culture through politics, right? Like, look at Trudeau, perfect example, right? Like, essentially trying to stamp out Christianity in some regards, right? Like, he's trying to shape what people should think through his political actions. And so to me, that's a willful ignorance, the fact that no, politics is being driven by culture, not the other way around.
Sure. So IJ, in light of what happened, because I listened to the episode with you and Kaelynne, and I listened to it with Tyra, and we don't have any kids, and we've had difficulties in just listening to you guys talk about it. It was very helpful. And like, how did you cope with it? Because it actually you lost 2 children.
Yeah, that's right.
And so what did you do to cope?
So I think the first, when we lost Kazingram, I'd lost people in my life before, right? I lost my grandmother when I was 10, my uncle when I was 11, my aunt when I was 10, my uncle when I was 15. Like, there have been multiple people that have died, and it's on. And I would say I was pretty young. This is all before I was 18. A lot, all the deaths that I came across, and but it was never something that I reflected upon. Even though I love my grandma dearly, I don't think I understood. I think she was the closest person that I was with in terms of extended family members that passed away. But it didn't really click what happened. So all that to say, when Kazingram died, and I woke up that morning, I still remember very clearly. I woke up that morning, and I usually just sort of put my ear to my wife's belly just to hear his heartbeat, because we knew at this point that his heart was failing. And that morning I couldn't hear anything, and I remember my heart sinking and thinking, man, he must have died. And that moment was essentially, it was a turning point for many things. But when we and I remember sitting at the hospital, sort of thinking that, this is probably just a dream. I just have to wake up, and he'll be awake. And I'm holding Kazingram, and I'm thinking, okay, he's probably just sleeping, and he's got to wake up sometime. He's got to wake up, and he never wakes up, of course. And the first few months, I would say the first few months after that to me were one of the most. The first year, was one of the most difficult year of my life, where I really didn't know, like, what the hell was happening. It was just, this tragedy that I never asked for, and nobody asks for it. And there were people in my life who I, as in the process, sort of lost, not because I don't think they had any malintention, but as a result of them probably not knowing what to do, they sort of cut ties because they didn't know what to do.
Mm.
And that was like an added sorrow. It's like, well, I thought you were my good friend. Like, why would you leave me in the middle of all of this, you know? And, you know, we had good friends who stuck around and helped us, and we were very thankful for them. But what helped me the most of anything is me going and doing Brazilian Jiu Jitsu. And it's something that I've been doing since. And essentially, I became, I to an extent became obsessed with it because it was the one thing in my life that I could control everything in. Like when I stepped on the mats, I could control everything. I couldn't lie about who I was on the mat in terms of whether I knew stuff or not, right? Because if I didn't know
it was
anything,
blatantly obvious how much you sucked.
Yeah, exactly. Right? You come on and you would get strangled if you know, and you couldn't BS your way around it. You know, you couldn't come in pretending you knew something and then, you know, you could win something. Highly unlikely. So doing that and going there, I went there, you know, I trained that first year after Kazingram died. I think, if possible, I trained 6 days out of 7.
Really?
And, yeah, 6 out of 7 days. And I would go, sometimes I would go for like 2-3 hours, right? I would just stay and just go. And it was that one time where all my energy and my focus was on improving this one aspect of my life that I could, to the minutest detail, control, right? So I could control the speed at which I progressed, the speed at which I learned. I could essentially control everything. And that doing Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu essentially helped me fight my depression that I was in. It was a bad depression. And, you know, it's not like I got diagnosed for it or anything like that, but I think I know what depression is.
You know when you're going through it.
Yeah. I know.
The reason why I asked that is because, you know, you're a philosopher.
Yeah.
You do philosophies, and especially, you know, like you talked about having skin in the game and going through tough times as a philosopher.
Yeah.
And what is it about Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, the philosophy of it, and that helped you overcome?
It was the idea that when things get, and I don't know if this is PG. Is this a PG show?
No, man, it's rated R, man. Like, yo, let's go. We grown. We sanctified and grown. Let's get it on.
You know,
we 18 plus when necessary.
Yeah, come on, man. We grown up,
or whatever the adult rating is on.
Yeah, saved and sanctified.
18 plus. Yeah. You know, it was essentially, it's that when you're doing Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, you get placed in very shitty positions, and sometimes it literally can feel like you're about to die if somebody's trying to suffocate you, right? And you're trying to get out, or if they're really being tough and sort of applying tremendous pressure on you, on your chest. Oh man, it feels terrible. It feels like you're suffocating. And essentially, in those moments, to me, when that happened, it was an analogy to my life of whether I was going to make it and not, you know, and not do something stupid in my life. Right? Was I going to decide to continue living and, you know, fighting for my life and sticking to it and getting out of this, or would I just give up? You know, so every time I went back, it was a reminder for me to keep fighting and to not give up. You know, there's no point giving up. If you give up, that's it. You know, there's no more life if you give up.
Okay, so sorry. And oh no, sorry. What you were gonna say?
Yeah, it was just that was one of the main things of why I went back and how that helped me.
Yeah. No, I was going to ask that. What is Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu for people who are like, hold on, what?
Oh, what's happening?
What's that? what makes it unique than other fighting styles?
Yeah. So Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, I would describe it as a systematic approach to ground fighting, where each positional increment or improvement leads to either the breaking of your opponent's limbs or strangling them. Right.
Okay.
So the whole point of the game is to find yourself in a dominant position such that you have isolated your opponent's limbs and are applying breaking pressure that either their wrist breaks or it's not really, I mean, it can break, but generally it'd be like ligaments, essentially. You're like dislocating people's arms, shoulders, wrists. You can't break people's femurs. Yeah, so, or strangle them, of course. And if you strangle them, obviously you let it go. There have been people that I've put to sleep because they didn't tap. That I didn't know that they were being strangled, so they got put to bed, and then I realized like a second later, it's like, oh, this guy's not moving. I'll let go and totally asleep, right? So that's what Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu is. And most, like, if you watch UFC, every single person in the UFC practices Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu on some level, right? Whether they practice it formally, like I would formally in terms of only doing that thing, just like every UFC fighter knows how to box, but they don't formally. Some of them formally don't practice boxing; they just do mixed martial arts, which includes boxing, jiu-jitsu, and wrestling or Muay Thai. So that is what it is for anybody who didn't know what jiu-jitsu.
So based on what you said, I think there's a fair follow-up question of like, how often are there injuries in the gym? Because, it's sort of, you're like, oh yeah, they break arms. Like, now my like, broken limbs, like in general, if I'm not mistaken, for the most part, you're getting to the point of like right before that, and then the person taps.
Yeah. I mean, that's the wise thing to do for sure, because you want to come back and train. But in terms of injury, I would say, I unfortunately, it's I'm not a young buck in terms of like my age, right, anymore. So there are guys that I train with who are, like the youngest guy that I know, I believe he's 15, and I just came back from the gym today after training, and we're recording this. So there was a 15-year-old and a 16-year-old, and then we have our head coach Tim. He's, I believe, like in his 40s, mid 40s, and then there are me, and then some of my friends who are sort of in the late 20s, early 30s. So in terms of injury, I unfortunately have sustained more injuries than I would have liked. One, probably because I think I was a bit too I was experimenting a lot, and as a result of that, I sort of injured myself. So I have both my LCLs tore, and then my rotator cuff recently tore, and then I tore my left, I think it's called like the posterior ligament in your ankle.
Okay.
But all that to say, like, it's, I wasn't doing any, I mean, one was sort of foolish, where my rotator cuff tore. I was wrestling somebody much bigger than me, and I shot for a takedown, and then they sprawled on my shoulder, and it just kind of popped off completely. But other than that, injuries are pretty rare if you have good training partners. But if you have a very spazzy newcomer, you could sustain an injury if you too are also new. But if you're going a spazzy dude with somebody who's a bit more seasoned, they'll
smarten the spazzy person up real quick.
Yeah, I mean, it almost always happens, right? You come in somebody who's like 190 pounds, athletic. They're like, oh yeah, I did so and so sports, and like, okay, cool, and you go and you start rolling, call it rolling, and then boom, like 30 seconds in, they're getting strangled. They're like, what? Let's do that again. Go back, and then get strangled again. Ow, what? That doesn't make sense. And it sort of happens for 5 minutes, and then by the end of it, they're either never come back, which has happened, or they're like, okay, I guess there's something here to learn. And
or they took a huge piece of humble pie.
Yeah, exactly, and baked it very slowly in their house. Yeah.
So I think this transitions well to the topic of let's say police brutality and I think it was New York or one of
Yeah,
the states
New York.
made chokeholds illegal.
Yeah,
And-
chokehold. Yeah.
And I think we can use that as sort of a launch pad into jiu-jitsu as a solution to some extent to police brutality.
Yeah.
But I wanted to get your take just to start on the idea of making chokeholds illegal. Is that going to make people safer or less safe?
So it was definitely New York. So New York did that, and they also I think it just got repealed, but they had a law. They had just voted in the law maybe like a year or so ago, where right after the George Floyd incident happened, New York said, "Oh yeah, you can't place any limbs on a down opponent on any limb on a person's upper body." Which, if you know anything about grappling, if you know anything about controlling people on the ground, if you're unable to do that, there's essentially zero ability to control an adrenaline pumped person who's athletic, or that they don't even have to be athletic, right? Because if you can't,
Adrenaline alone.
yeah, adrenaline alone can do. There's so many there are plenty. People can type this up. If you type up like, I think the best place you find it is if you type in like Gracie breakdown police incidents or something, and you'll find multiple videos of police who unfortunately didn't get enough training or never had training at all, trying to control a resisting suspect. And there's one particular video in my mind right now, and I'll get into, Joel, your question, but this two highway patrolmen pulled over this car, and they were trying to arrest this dude. Okay, and the guy's not even he's not huge or anything, just like mid-size, 6 foot maybe. Two cops who were probably around the same height. They're bigger. They're trying to maintain this guy on the ground. And the one mistake that people do, I mean, I shouldn't say people, police specifically who are untrained, what they'll do is when they try to put a handcuff on a ground opponent, they will turn the opponent onto their belly, right? Without any control. And the moment you do that on a down opponent with no control, upper body control, what essentially happens is you're giving them the easiest escape, which is for them to go on all fours and table themselves up. Once you get somebody who's uncontrolled on all fours,
You've
they
just
can
lost.
posture up. Yeah, they can posture up and make a book. And you'll see clear examples of this if you watch the UFC. And if somebody's trying to take, if they're beating, if two guys are fighting, the guy down is uncontrolled. If he is able to turtle up or get onto all fours, and somebody's trying to control him by not actually holding him, they will essentially get up and turn around, and they'll stand up. They get into standing position. So you can imagine this. These guys are not UFC trained or jiu-jitsu trained or any sort of grappling. Now trying to maintain some guy whose instinct is to get up, table up, and posture up and stand
without being able to put a limb on the downed individual.
Yeah. So now go to New York and you're a cop. So you have somebody, say you have a thief, or I don't know, some guy who's beating up random people on the streets, and you're trying to arrest this dude, and you cannot place your limb on your opponent's upper body. There's no chance you can control them unless you can't even sit on them, right? So you have to handcuff their legs or something at this point. So you have to essentially control somebody. What you have to do is if you like, this is if you're fighting, if you go to the ground and you're a cop or you're somebody trying to control the other guy who's on the ground, what you have to do is you have to get on what's known as a knee on belly. You essentially getting one of your knees placed onto your opponent's belly button or their sternum, and then the leg that's not on is used as a base, so that if the ground opponent is trying to push off you, you essentially apply your knee pressure down. And when that happens and you don't know what you're doing, you're on the ground, you will essentially lose air very, very fast. And you give up very quickly. In about like 100 seconds, you kind of give up. You're like, oh, okay. Handcuff me already, right?
I can't breathe.
I can't breathe.
Or not so much I can't breathe. I've run out of oxygen because you've lowered the lung capacity by continually pushing down in that area.
Yeah, or they've exhausted themselves, so they'll just kind of give up. They're like, okay, just handcuff me. And you see there are multiple videos of this, of trained jiu-jitsu cops who arrest people without even punching them at all. Just like, poop, take them down, calm them down, their knee on belly. It was like the guy fights, he's like, okay, I kind of give up. Just arrest me. And then they just sort of, passively turn over and they can handcuff him. So in New York, they banned this whole thing. And like in the jiu-jitsu community, people were like livid. They're like, who are these idiots making these laws here? These are politicians with no skin in the game. They're not the cops on the front line who have to deal with these, some of these crazy criminals. And now you're telling them that first, obviously, we don't want to kill people. We don't want to shoot people. Okay. So, and you want to do the least amount of harm. But now you're telling us that the one tool that we have to do the least amount of harm on a suspected criminal is banned. It's totally illegal. So now what are you going to do?
Use your gun or your taser.
Yeah, you have to revert back to some sort of physical harm, right? Whether that's a baton on the head or I don't know what they would do. But New York did end up repealing it, I think, a month ago. And I have some very progressive woke friends. Maybe they're more acquaintances. I wouldn't say friends. who are the least trained. Right? They have no training in any grappling, in any fighting sports. They know nothing about how to control a resisting opponent, like zero. And then they're out here preaching that police should not be able to do this. We should have less funding for police. Police are all bastards. As like one guy particularly likes to say, if your dad, doesn't matter if your dad's a cop, your brother's a cop, they're all bastards. And that's all he says, right? And I had a comment. I was like, yeah, what are you talking about? They're all bastards, man. They're all bastards. I was like, this guy has no experience whatsoever, right? So, jiu-jitsu, all to say, I think all cops should practice precision jiu-jitsu because you'll have less harm being done, less injuries to the policemen, less deaths. For sure, I would think less deaths because people don't have to revert to using their guns to control somebody. Or, there's that unfortunate story a few months ago of a woman who accidentally pulled out her gun instead of the taser. At police, that was a very sad story. And people can't forget that when you're in that situation, you have your own adrenaline. And if anybody has been in any fighting situation, they would be a bit more sympathetic. They would be a bit more understanding to what pressure the cops have to go through when somebody's, very aggressive. So
that's a good point.
Yeah, training any martial arts, I think, helps calm your nerves a bit more than it would have otherwise.
Yeah, it's funny you say that because when you think about the philosophy of combat, and just physical altercations, so me and you have had conversations about this before. So I'm not a fan of mixed martial arts. I have difficult time watching UFC, but I'm a big boxing fan.
Yeah.
I'm a big boxing fan, and my trainer said,
"Who's your current?"
Come on! Don't get me started on Canelo. Don't get me. I'm not gonna go there. This is not the show. Don't get me excited.
That's a whole other podcast.
Yo, do not look. I'm already getting excited. That's how you know. But my trainer said to me, he says, like, think about it, Darnell. Like, like you said, there's a lot of people saying, like, I don't want my kids fighting. Yeah. But my trainer said, he's like, think about it. If everybody knew how to fight, you'd have less gun violence.
Well, for sure you would have.
Because at some point, like at the end of the day, if you have a problem with somebody, like, okay, cool. Like, meet me at the gym. We'll wear these gloves. We'll have these headgear and we'll go at it.
Yeah.
And then the second thing was a friend of mine who does mixed martial arts. He said, you know what, Darnell? People are worried, like what you said, people are worried about police hurting people. But he says people who know how to fight don't hurt people. Mm-hmm. People who don't know how to fight hurt people.
For sure.
Right? Because you know what it takes to put a guy away.
Yeah.
And initially you're still in a defensive posture when someone is attacking you. Because you're just trying to diffuse the situation.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I mean? So it's fascinating. And I have this philosophy. I'm a philosopher too, IJ.
I know. Both of you are.
Yeah, I'm a philosopher, and I have this saying, you know, like when people say, "Oh yeah, you shouldn't fight," and I usually say like, "Well, have you had your ass whooped before?" Like I have.
Yeah.
I have, and it was Tim's, and the guys were wearing Tim's. You know what I mean? So God speaks to you in two ways: through divine revelation, and a good old fashioned ass whooping. Good old fashioned. There's nothing like that to bring common sense to your noggin, you know. So it's one of those things. I think fighting and learning how to fight is important.
I think it's crucial. People tend to forget. I mean, people. When I say people, I mean more so. Christians tend to forget that Jacob wrestled an angel for the whole night, right?
Mm-hmm.
And if you read the passage, it says that Jacob held the angel, or God's representative, until he was blessed, and that's when his name changed to Israel.
Mm-hmm.
And if you reread that passage, and you do wrestling, it's most likely a body lock, right? And when you get a body lock around your opponent's ribs and you hold tight, you're essentially squeezing their air out, and it's very, very difficult to move in that position. You either have to bite your opponent's nose or poke his eyes or do something. Like it's very hard to get out. So the idea that you should keep kids away from any sort of fighting sports I think is a bit ridiculous. Like I love my mom, and my mom, she raised us, but my mom is a hardcore pacifist. I mean, she's straight up very, very pacifist. And when we were growing up, we weren't allowed, like zero. We weren't even allowed to watch WWE or WWF at that point.
Poor you.
Right? It was like we would have to go to my cousin's place and watch it. And that's how I watched it.
WrestleMania.
It was like Triple H.
Royal Rumble, Triple H, Stone Cold.
Yeah, all those guys, The Rock, and we weren't allowed to watch it. And my grandfather, much like you, Darnell, huge boxing fan, like huge. So he would watch boxing. And then if we came down to his house and we caught him watching, he'd be like, "Oh, get out, go. Your mom's going to kick my ass, get out." He would always kick us out, right? So whenever we wanted to do boxing as kids, like me, my brother and I always wanted to do boxing or kung fu. At that point, it was Bruce Lee. Like, we were huge Bruce Lee fans. Mom said, "No, as long as you live in my house, my rules, you can't do it." So, and then obviously I got married. I moved here, got married, and I was like, "My house, my rules." and I started doing jiu-jitsu, and that's when I realized, it's one thing to be a pacifist. Like I have nothing against being pacifist. I would say I'm probably more pacifist than I'm aggressive. But one thing I realized was in training jiu-jitsu that, there is a sense in which your confidence grows because you start to understand what your body is capable of. And when you understand what your body is capable of, you realize, oh, I'm not as like before, when I didn't know anything, I would be relying on my size. Not that I was a big guy to begin with. That's a funny thing, right? But I would rely on something external to myself to make myself look bigger or stronger than I was, or more confident. But now it's like, I'm only 170 pounds. I'm trying to get up to 185. That's the goal. So you guys have to keep me accountable.
180. How tall are you?
I'm 5'11".
Stop lying. You're a Christian. You're saved. Stop lying, IJ. I stand next. I'm fine. You're not taller than me, man.
I'm 5'11".
Anyways.
I tell you, I'm 180.
Anyway, I'll get Anthony to edit that part out. Keep talking.
But I'm 170, right? So I was 140. Imagine that. I was 140 2 years ago. Do you know how skinny I was? Man,
yeah.
Like when you knew me, Darnell, even when we did that podcast the first time, in person, I was 140 then.
Really?
Yeah, I was 140. So now I'm 170. And what changed essentially that time frame between those two is I started practicing Brazilian Jiu Jitsu, and I realized, man, I don't need to have big muscles to beat up people. Not that I'm
Right.
out here trying to beat up people.
Right.
Which made me go, now I can work out, because now I'm working out and putting on muscle, not to impress or make myself look bigger. It's just that when I'm on the mats, I want to be stronger and beat up
Yo,
people easier.
yo, IJ, I'm telling you, there's this saying. I heard this guy say this at the gym when I was working out, and he said, it's one thing to look like you can fight,
Yeah.
i.e., lifting dumbbells and looking buff. It's another thing to know how to fight.
Yes.
And just because you're bigger doesn't necessarily mean you're a better fighter. So yeah,
for sure. I think, what's the point of having all those big muscles if you don't know how to fight?
right.
Like, you have all those big muscles, you look cool. I mean, I'm sure there are lots of social benefits to be looking big, but at the end of the day, it's you and the mirror, right? When you look at the mirror, do you see a skinny man in front of you, even though you may be like 210, 6'1"? If you do, man, you gotta find something else that's, whatever it is that you're doing, it's not really working. But if you do, and I'm not saying martial arts is the solution to all things, but I think it is a solution to many, many things. I think if more people knew how to fight and understood the damage that you could do, people would be more careful, I think more understanding, and less willing to be aggressive immediately up front, right? Like, a friend of mine, I don't know, I guess you guys don't know him, I feel like he practices, he's a mixed martial artist down in the States. He's in LA. And he was at this very recently at an Antifa protest, right? Because he wanted to document what was happening, because he was in LA and he was sort of never seeing any of the damage that Antifa was doing to downtown California, Los Angeles.
Oh, sorry, IJ. Can you just clarify who Antifa is?
I think you guys do
just
a
quick
job of that. It's like they're the short
or
form
or Joel.
Yeah, Joel, you want to do it? Do a better job.
The anti-fascists who use fascist techniques to impose their will.
Okay, all right, go ahead, IJ.
I guess that was accurate. Yeah. So these guys, they're generally the ones throwing Molotov at the cops or burning down businesses. So
they're the ones always dressed in black.
Always, yeah, with masks. All the ones that George Soros funds. So my friend wanted to go down, and he's a mixed martial artist, right? Him and his coach, both mixed martial artists. They want to go down, document, because it's their city, the city they love. So they're down, and he was actually, my friend was trending on Twitter the other day because of what I'm about to tell you. So he's down there. He's a Japanese dude. Okay, man's a Japanese dude. Antifa shows up, and my friend, unfortunately, according to the Antifa, he's wearing a gym shirt and it has lightnings, right? The lightning emoji, right?
Yeah.
You guys know the lightning emoji, right?
Yeah.
So these Antifa idiots came up to him and said, "Yo, you white supremacist, why are you wearing a swastika on your shirt?" And he's like, "It's lightning, bro." "No, it's a swastika symbol," and you can see this. It's all on video. It's a swastika, you white supremacist. And my friend goes, "I'm Japanese, bro." It's like, "No, you're not. You skinhead." And he's also bald, right? So they call me a skinhead. But this guy's a straight Japanese. Like both his parents are like Japanese, and he's Japanese American. He's like, "Bro, I'm Japanese." Like, "No, you're a skinhead." All this stuff. And then one of these Antifa people, this woman, comes up to his coach, who's a mixed martial art coach. The man's dangerous, and starts kicking him. Like, just starts kicking him. And my friend's coach is, you could tell he's just being calm. He's like, "Get away from me. Get away from me." And he's pushing her, and she keeps coming up, kicking him, running away, coming back, and then, trying to do a blindside hook on his face. Bah, bah. And so this man gets annoyed. So he has a bottle in his hand, and he simply just swings the bottle and whacks her head, right? As she's running to him, punching. As she's doing like a Superman punch, whack on her head. And she's like, "Oh, he smacked me on my head." And then the Antifa just stormed this dude. The point of the story is my friend's coach was, if you watch the video, he was like extremely calm. He was trying not to hurt this woman who is clearly upset at him, didn't know how to fight, pretending as if she knew how to fight and kicking him, punching him. She even threw something at him. But this man was so calm. I was watching. I was like, "Yo, this guy is so calm. How is he staying so calm?" But I know, in my opinion, I think him having actually fought people, knowing how much he could damage someone, he thought, "Well, why would I kick this little lady's ass? There's no point here." But it's that sort of the ability to maintain your cool in such a aggressive and dangerous situation, I think, is a power that most people don't have.
Mm-hmm.
So training mixed martial arts for kids, I think, is extremely important. So if you have kids and you're listening, you should send your kids to mixed martial arts.
Oh boy, I guess we have a lot of husbands and wives that listen to it, but hopefully it leads to some good conversation. I think that on the topic of mixed martial arts and combat and philosophy, I think even it helps to bring out virtue and courage, and I think that's something we lack today. Me as an educator, we talk a lot about bullying. I see a lot of bullying in the playground. And as a basketball coach, there's a lot of bullying on the court, and I'm sure Joel, as the guy who plays hockey, I'm sure there's bullies in your men's hockey league. I'm sure of it, right? So the point is, bullies are everywhere, and there's always an opportunity for someone to be courageous and stand up. And I think, and I got into a debate with one of my professors about this, that not everybody is equipped to be courageous. Not everybody's equipped, because they're like, "Oh yeah, just stand up against bullies and stand up to the bully." And I'm like, well, but when you stand up to bullies, or like your friend did to the woman, eventually it escalates. Right? Because if you say to a bully, "Stop," the bully's going to say, or what? Or what? Or what? Like, you know what I mean? Or what? Are you gonna do about it? You're like, well, you know what I mean? Like, I'm gonna tell the teacher. Like, that doesn't help your case at all. Pardon?
That wouldn't help your case at all.
Yeah, well, especially if it's our school property. You know what I mean? But the point I'm making is that at that point, it's going to escalate, and you have to be ready to scrap in all forms. And we've talked about this before, IJ. So if you're, if you're on your feet and you're using your hands and you're boxing, you got to know how to use your hands. If it goes to the ground, you got to know how to grapple in your Brazilian Jiu Jitsu and so forth. And the point I'm making is just that when you are equipped, you can be courageous. And I'm not saying you have to win. We're not saying you have to beat people up. I'm not saying you have to come out the victory, because as Christians, Jesus Christ is the perfect example of courage. He got his butt whooped. He got nailed to a cross, and he still won. Right? So for us, we're not out here trying to fight to win fights. But if a woman's being picked on, and you want to stand up for a woman, you want to stand up for a kid, you want to stand up for your kids or your wife, someone's disrespecting your wife. You can at least say, "Hey, that's enough." Or what? All right, well, we're going to scrap. I might lose, but I'm not having it. And courage is contagious, and it takes a lot.
Is contagious. I think that's a great point, Darnell. Courage is very contagious. And people really do underestimate how contagious it can be. Right? You just need one person to stand up. It could be political bullying, it could be any sort of bullying on the courts, anywhere. You just sort of need somebody to stand up.
The political realm, vaccinations.
Yeah. I mean it is sort of bullying, right? You have a lot of people pressuring. Whether you're against it or for it, there's no sense in which it makes sense where they're saying, "Oh, if you're not vaccinated, then you're out here killing everybody and their grandmother." And it's bullying where a political leader would say, "And then we're going to come door to door and make sure that you get your vaccine." Right? I was watching a video. I think it was like Andrew Cuomo.
Yep.
the New York guy who was saying that. I was like, what? You can't just do that. But anyways, the point being, I think, a good martial artist is a good philosopher, and a good philosopher is a good martial artist. And to me, this is very controversial for me to say, and an unpopular opinion.
Hey, man! We have a policy. We're controversial for the sake of godliness.
Yeah, so I think people, I think most philosophers are not good philosophers, unfortunately, because they don't really know what it's like. There's a divorce that has happened in philosophy, and it would even go into theology, where people have lost what it means to be human. Because if you're just sitting at your desk, not doing anything, and let's say you're just typing, that's what the majority of us do now for work, and you don't do any sort of physical exercise. I mean, physical exercise is a great step, but doing martial arts, I think there's a good reason why the Chinese have always equated doing martial arts and doing philosophy, because they knew very early on, and the Greeks and the Athenians, right? Plato, Socrates, they all did martial arts, wrestling specifically for them.
Yeah. Plato was a wrestler.
Big wrestler. I mean, his name Plato means broad shoulder because he had huge shoulders because he was a wrestler. And doing those things, what it does, it connects you to every part of your body because you have to be aware of it. And two, it ties you deeply with another human being such that it becomes a dynamic, moving chess game that helps you understand how the world works, how your body works, how interacting with humans work. Where if you just sit at your desk and you're just armchairing everything, you're doing an armchair philosophy, armchair theology, armchair whatever you want to do, it doesn't work that way. And I think martial arts, it's a to be a great philosopher, you have the necessary condition to be a great philosopher, I think, is to do martial arts, but it's not sufficient, right? It's just doing martial arts by itself. It's not going to do anything. You do have to think and try to understand.
Read.
Yep, for sure. Read, talk to people. Those are all important. But at the end of the day, if you don't really I think there is I don't know if it's a real quote by Aristotle, or if it's like a quote that was ascribed to him, which is not really by Aristotle, but it went something along the lines of, it's a shame for a man to grow old without ever knowing the full potential of his body. And when I first read it, it was like there's another paragraph to it, and I read it, I thought, man, that's so true. Imagine if I had gone 80 years old and never knew Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, I never did boxing, and I never did a boxing class, I never did Muay Thai classes. Man, that would be a crappy life, because I would think I know stuff, but I don't really know what it means to get punched in the face or get strangled, or what it means to actually inflict pain or have pain inflicted on me by somebody else. And I think knowing that makes me not want to inflict pain on people, but also helps me understand that, okay, when you're living in this world, you can't really escape pain and suffering, and it's sort of part of life. So that's another like philosophical reason for practicing martial arts for me.
So I want to go back to that. You said like this is a controversial perspective, or you're sort of saying that like you need to do martial arts to be better at philosophy. And we talked earlier about the humble pie aspect that comes with martial arts, but I'm wondering, what is it that the person who does philosophy that doesn't do martial arts is missing?
They're divorced from reality, to me. Like, because essentially, to do philosophy as a general whole, is a love of wisdom, and to love wisdom, you can't simply have knowledge and not implement the knowledge in the world.
Ivory tower.
And classic academic problem right now that we're facing, and you guys sort of know this as well, right?
Yeah.
People sitting in the ivory tower telling people how to live, how to act, how to, you should have courage. Courage is so easy if you do this, but if you don't do anything difficult in your life, there's no chance that you have courage. There's like zero chance, in my opinion.
Yo, Pastor IJ.
Like there, one thing that so okay, so to answer Joel's question, so what those philosophers are missing is doing hard things where they're purposely placing themselves in these hard situations where, like me, if you were like me, you could potentially have your rotator cuff torn, which you shouldn't have your rotator cuff torn to begin with, and I'm not espousing that people should get it torn. But the pain that I felt was in the pursuit of something greater. And so that pain was worth it to an extent because I was pursuing some sort of perfection perfection, however you conceive of perfection, but in jiu-jitsu or wrestling, sorry. So what these guys are missing is essentially what it means to actually live out in this world. And martial arts is essentially, to me, a small, intense version of living a philosophical life because you are putting yourself through suffering. Right? Anytime you enter the mats, there is a 90% chance that somebody's going to kick your ass, which means that you're going to suffer for however long the round goes. And at that point in time, when it's happening, I don't know, Joel, have you done sparring? Have you sparred before?
No.
With your brothers?
Well, that's what I was like. I mean, I beat up my brothers. I don't know. Doesn't really count. And no. Let's just go with no.
Okay. I was going to say, let's just go with yes. Okay. And Darnell, I'm assuming you've sparred, right? So in those situations where if you're going up against a really good boxer, right, or if you're going up against a really good grappler,
I studied karate as a kid.
Okay, there are moments in which you feel like giving up because you're getting your ass whooped, right? You're like, I'm trying to do this, nothing's working. And sometimes, or maybe most of the time, life is like that. You're trying to do something, doesn't work. So it's in doing those things and placing yourself in these positions, you allow yourself to understand the practical principles of what philosophy is trying to teach, right? At the end of the day, philosophy is trying to teach you how to live in this world, but you can't live in this world well if you're naively pacifist, right? And you don't know how to inflict harm, and so you don't understand what it means to suffer and what it means to inflict harm. So, because if you know how to inflict harm, obviously if you know how to inflict harm, in my opinion, you are more careful as to when you do it. But if you don't know it, you think it's very, like Justin Trudeau, the man's a boxer, I believe.
Oh yeah.
Tim Moen, the Libertarian Party leader, tried to challenge him to a boxing match.
Oh, this shit 100%, man. But Justin Trudeau's, he's a boxer, and I would have expected him to be better because he practices. Maybe
it looked terrible. Yeah, it looked terrible.
But it's something that I think they're.
So my let's say armchair diagnosis to some extent of what you've said is I'm wondering if what you started off about the corruptness. I'll circle around in a second. I just want to. So when you were talking about the corruptness in academia, it made me think of how we talk about public choice theory with politicians having different incentives. And so for academics, you sort of talked through how their incentives are different than the regular person because they're willing to make these compromises because, well, that's how I get tenure or that's how I move to the next level in my career progression. And I was wondering if what you said about the separation from reality for the philosophers is because the philosopher of today is an academic and the world they live in is so far removed from the vast majority of the world.
Yes.
And so to some extent, what you're saying about martial arts is actually a means to resolve that problem that the current academia world creates. Would you say that's fair?
I think that's a great summary of it. It is the diagnosis to the disease of academia currently. It is essentially the red pill to ivory tower, the ivory tower that currently exists, right? Man, there are so many philosophers. I'm not going to name one. I'm not going to name anyone, but there are many philosophers that I know who are great. I mean, absolutely brilliant at talking their way out of anything. Finding a little, you got your, this is circular reasoning, or you made a logical fallacy here, you made a logical error here, blah blah. They're great, and they'll talk about how, they have all these theories and how to be virtuous. Oh, and I don't believe these things because there's not enough reason, or like I can go on and on and on. But when it comes down to it, and then you ask them, okay, fine, how are you living your life? Like, are you doing these things? Show me where your money is. Not actually show me where your money is, but do you have skin in the game? Do you have soul in the game of what you're Oftentimes, never the case, right? There's this like a skeptical philosopher that I know, or a few, I should say. They're like, I'm actually quite skeptical about reality. I'm like, okay, oh yeah, you're quite skeptical. Okay, sure. If I punch you, are you going to move out the way? Like, yeah, of course. I was like, well, if you're skeptical about reality and I'm part of reality, why the heck would you move out the way? Just get that nosebleed, right? It's fake at the end of the day. But no, they're like, AJ, this is just silly for you to say something like this. But at the end of the day, it's like, it's not silly. If you think reality is fake, well, take this bloody punch that I'm putting right in front of your face, or I'll knee you in the balls, Well, tell me then if the reality is fake. Like, no, that's not the case. But, and this is the case, I think. Unfortunately, the academic cultures has seeped in to theologians and the Christian community as a whole. The more upper echelon Christians, I should say, the more academic-oriented Christians, I think they do have the same problem, right? Where they're, I think we should have scholars. We should have Greek scholars, people who are experts on Hebrew, people who are experts in the Old Testament, in the New Testament, and John, blah blah blah. I think we should all have but if you're a Christian, or if you practice any sort of faith, right? What matters is not how well you know your Greek, or parsing your Greek. It's parsing your Greek verbs. It's like it's not at the end of the day, that's not it, right? It's whether you live and you have courage. Because application is, at the end of the day, that's what matters, right? The whole book of James is essentially that. I never understood James until I practiced martial arts. I'll be completely honest, right? I double majored in theology, and James was always a book. It was like, okay, cool story, bro. Like, moving on to the next book. Until I practiced martial arts, I never really understood James' emphasis on, he says, works without faith faith without works is dead. I was like, well, yeah, I mean, duh. But then when you actually
yeah, right, that's right,
realize it, you're like, oh, okay, this is what he's talking about. Like, you can't have people say they're Christian and, I believe people should have courage, but then when the government comes pressing down, pressuring you to do certain things, or telling you to believe certain things, or telling you that, you know what, euthanasia is great for people. Like, everybody should get euthanized. Everybody who's old and their grandma should get euthanized. And Christians like, yeah, I guess so. Or they'll say, yeah, my vote doesn't really matter. Like, I don't think, I'll just stay at home. I don't think it's important to engage in public conversations, because I want to live my Christian faith by myself, and not that. It's like, listen, that's not how it works. You want courage, you want to practice any of your virtues, you have to, you don't become, I'll give you, if we stay with virtue, you don't become courageous overnight. You don't become courageous when this big battle happens and you have to, all of a sudden you have courage. Courage is built over time with small incremental wins that you accomplish throughout the day or throughout the weeks, right?
Yeah, I'm writing it down. Taking notes. That's good.
And I think that's what people have forgotten, that virtue is not something that you produce just overnight when this big bad thing happens and all of a sudden you're like the most virtuous guy. That doesn't happen that way. It happens when you're winning these small fights, and you're like, when the big fight comes, you're prepared. Like, okay, this is it. I can take it on. But I know that Darnell. I think Darnell and I had this conversation where Darnell was saying that he does something or a few difficult things every day to, sort of callous his mind, if I can use that term. And that I think is so crucial, and I wish more people did that. And and that's something that I've practiced since, to answer Joel, going back to Joel's question of what has changed in life since our son Kazingram and our other, I would say, son died, is that doing these small difficult things that I definitely don't want to do when I wake up, or at the end of the day I'm like, oh yeah, I forgot I was supposed to have a cold shower today. It's like, if I have a cold shower, I know I won't be able to sleep for an extra hour because I'm going to be fully awake, but I'll go do it because I know that if I don't do it, then tomorrow I'll feel like shit and like, I missed it. So there are small things that I think are very important.
Yeah, yo, IJ, man, I started doing the warm shower. Usually I take hot showers, but I'm working towards the cold, so I'm doing warm showers right now.
Okay. Okay, man, that's a step, man. It's huge.
Yeah. Man, you're in Canada. You should have just started with the polar dips.
Oh man, no, that's okay. IJ, if people want to get in touch with you, man, where can they find you?
I'm on Twitter. I have like at IJMAKN, and then they can find Kazingram Dialogue, KZINGRAM Dialogue on Google Podcast, or they can go to the Kazingram Dialogue, KazingramDialogue.com website, and I'm there, or LinkedIn. I'm on
and then
LinkedIn.
Plug your blog as well.
Oh yeah, I have a blog that I haven't written in a while. It's called.
But it's okay. They can still subscribe.
Oh yeah, for sure. Yeah, IJMAKAN .substack SUBSTACK, and that's the blog is titled "Becoming Anti-Fragile," and essentially it's talking about things that I do or things that I think about or how I conceive of the world around me and how I should act in the world. I think that's the best summary for that one.
Well, we'll put those links in the show notes for sure.
Yeah, definitely. Cool. That way they don't have to hit rewind. But yeah, we'll make sure put all your stuff in the show notes. And yeah, we definitely appreciate, let's just say, your 2 cents.
Yeah.
Yeah, I appreciate you guys having me. It's an honor to be on your show.
Oh,
I listen to it, and I always enjoy it. I try to share episodes with my friends, and it's something that I want more people to listen to, and I think it'll be helpful. I think it's helpful. Unfortunately, I say unfortunately not because I say unfortunately because people have a tendency of thinking that people from two guys who, I guess I'll use the modern term of a black and a white guy, how they can't have a good conversations or they can't be friends. There are some people I know who think that.
Sounds like a bunch of racists.
Oh. I think you and me both, man. You and me both. Man. So, having these conversations, I think it's crucially important. I hope your listeners continue supporting you guys. I think I don't know if you guys are going towards the route of paywall or Patreon, but if you guys should think about it, I'm sure you'll have. I'll be one of your first supporters.
Yeah, we got some stuff in the works. So.
Oh, I'm giving secrets away.
Oh yeah, no, it's good. No, it's good. That's good. Thank you, IJ. Thank you for coming on.
Teaser.
Yeah, no. Thank you for coming on, IJ. As the listeners can hear, yeah, it was a really good show, and yeah, Joel and I have been on your show, right? And you've been helpful for us. So yeah, it was a long time coming. So thank you for coming.
Yeah,
on,
we hope we have more listeners like you who share the podcast and promote us. So yeah, we're grateful, man. Appreciate it, and definitely appreciate you coming on the show. And hopefully some of our listeners, if philosophy is their thing, and even if it's not, I think those conversations around philosophical issues have more value than most people think, because I would suggest that what you're doing is not the ivory tower version of philosophy. It's actually having conversations with people who live out these things or actually are grounded. So yeah, exactly. I definitely don't miss an episode. So hopefully a couple of our listeners will subscribe over there too.
Check it out, subscribe. Yeah, thanks for having me here, guys.
Yeah, thank you. Later, man.
Peace.
But you heard me? Does that make sense?
Madden and Mitchell Media.